This is the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Outlook from Tuesday, August the 25th through Friday, August the 28th. Okay, so we talked about a frontal boundary dipping down into the southeast region about this time this week, and here we are. So we have the frontal boundary has reached the upstate of South Carolina, and it has made a dip into the Gulf Stream, so we should start to see moisture start pumping along this boundary up from the Gulf. Now, this morning, the only activity that we're seeing is offshore in this offshore troughing over the Gulf Stream in some areas near to the coastline. And that's very typical overnight hours. And if you look to the east, sometimes you can see some of these cumuliform clouds out there. They make for really good sunrises, and maybe a waterspout here and there if you're up early enough and you get to see it. But for right now, what we're looking at is potential for messy conditions from today all the way through Friday as this frontal boundary takes its time to get over the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to be a very slow mover, very weak, kind of a weak pattern in the Atlantic. Is there's really not much of a Bermuda high in place. It's more of a Bermuda Azores high that's over in this vicinity, with a ridge axis that extends all the way out to here. Now, as time goes on, that ridge axis could actually push over into this area to southern South Carolina to weaken the pattern even more. But for right now, we at least have about a 3 to 6 knot southerly synoptic flow from this. So nothing really robust out there to help on our sea breezes. But speaking of sea breezes, with thunderstorming activity firing off in the Midlands today, I'm expecting quite a bit of thunderstorm activity to try to make its way to the coastline, and some of this may develop here and move from the west-southwest to the east-northeast. Upper level winds do support some return flow from these thunderstorms, where the higher winds aloft will push some of the air out back over the Atlantic and back into the coastline to complete the circulation and get some of the winds up. I think today is going to be our best bet for some moderate builds. So I'm going to call for 12 to 16 knots today based on this evidence, and we'll probably see some potential for higher numbers should we get some return flow. Now, if we do get thunderstorming to develop over our area and contaminate the sea breeze over the coastline as it passes overhead, all bets may be off, and we saw that last week on our southerly flow when we had some potential in the air as well. So we have to really we have to stay dry along the coastline. If we get a strong enough sea breeze circulation with upper level return flow and the coastline stays drier, we may have some potential there for some mid to upper teens. But if those storms do pass overhead, it'll squash whatever potential there is, and the gradient will be affected by it. So we'll have to watch. Like I said, the next couple of days, this frontal boundary is going to be very slow, so we're looking at probably tomorrow, Wednesday, probably dropping off. I mean, we're talking 9 to 13 or maybe 10 to 14 knots from the south-southwest as well, as this frontal boundary very slowly takes its time. And then even into Thursday and Friday, where it hangs along the coastline. Now, we could get low pressures develop along this boundary as well to even further the moisture content and the thunderstorming activity. So we'll have to kind of take it day to day, but keep an eye on radar for the next few days, as thunderstorms could fire off very quickly with some daily heating. We're still in the 90s, we're still reaching 90s, and we're not out of the summer quite yet. And the sea surface temperatures are still holding right between 84 and 85 degrees. So we have still a very warm pattern ahead of this boundary. Now, there's some cooler air trying to spill down from Atlanta, and some of the parts of the country are starting to see this cool down, some fall effects and some early fall arrivals, and that's going to be typical for this time of the year, but they have not reached us yet. Okay, so I definitely want to take a look at our infrared loop. We're not seeing very much, but as I said today, we could see those afternoon thunderstorms, or even mid-morning to late morning for that matter, as the sun comes up. Start to see this satellite imagery become a little bit more populated with some cloud tops and thunderstorms. So we'll keep an eye on that. Looking at our local data scope from WeatherFlow, for the Charleston area, we're seeing a very, very light westerly flow, very light westerly land breezing this morning. Fort Sumter range light, we have about 3 knots. Land shadowed areas along the beaches are 2 knots each. We do have a little bit of a ending of the westerly flow at Folly Beach as the winds have died off, but we are seeing the southerly flow start to come back into the picture. Very, very light. And if we look at just a couple of the models, we see the NAM, the North American model 12 kilometer, actually come up in this late afternoon to evening. It looks like maybe a little bit of an evening surge. Now, when we talk about frontal boundaries being inland, sometimes we can get that evening or nocturnal surge later, as the temperatures are starting to fall, we get a little bit of an inversion ahead of it, and that helps to bring the winds up some. So that's kind of how we get an evening surge. Very possible to our beaches this evening ahead of that cold front, as long as the thunderstorms don't squash whatever we have going on over the coastline. But for right now, we're just looking at general light winds over the area, general light westerly flow, and then as the morning goes on, we'll probably see the winds kind of steer from the west-southwest and ultimately from the south or south-southwest for this afternoon. But we're looking at 12 to 16 knots and potential for a little bit higher, maybe some upper teens, as long as we stay dry, and that's going to be key, staying dry along the coastline. All right, so let's take a look at the earth.nilschool.net, and we can see the general flow, southerly flow. You can see the zipper in the atmosphere just east of the Appalachian Mountains, and you can see one little low pressure right here in the upstate of South Carolina, and you can see probably beginnings of other low pressures as this Gulf moisture streams along it, and you can see how very far to the east the high pressure is removed to that clockwise rotation of the winds at the surface. As we go higher up in the atmosphere, when you go up to about 500 HPA, according to this map, 500 millibars would be sort of the equivalent, and you can see how that dip, there's a dip in the jet stream up over the Great Lakes, and that's causing this high pressure to sort of sink down into the southeast region. Now we do see that general westerly flow. It is a little bit light as it gets to the coastline, northwest to the upstate, and then sort of swooping westerly to easterly over the coastline, and that'll help some of those lower to mid-level clouds kind of push towards the coast. And so we're talking about our sea breeze circulations. This is where it starts to help, where we see that mid-level stream up high help to push those cloud tops towards the coastline. But it can also push it over the coastline, which is not good for the sea breeze. And so if we go even higher up at 250 HPA or 250 millibars, that's about 34,000 feet, you can see that much stronger west-southwest to east-northeast flow. And that direction in general, with the higher cloud tops that build, tends to bring storming over the coastline. So that's it's a higher chance of that happening today, just looking at the higher winds. Okay, so that's going to be it for the Chucktown Wind Report. We'll say 12 to 16 knots today. We'll keep it low, 9 to 13 or 10 to 14 knots tomorrow. And as we get into Thursday, we'll probably keep it right at 9 to 13 knots from the south along that boundary. We may even see a southeasterly wind develop right along the coastline as low pressures bend the wind field along what we call a short wave. It won't bring the winds up. You'll probably see some fluctuations and some ups and downs as that boundary gets closer, and those thunderstorm outflows and inflows sort of affect the wind field. But as we get into Friday, probably just a general weaker overall flow with this high pressure ridging all the way into the coastline and winds becoming more southeast. Now if the boundary does clear by Friday, we'll probably see a northerly turn, but there again there isn't much of a pressure gradient behind the front, and I'm not expecting anything major this week. So sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're a fisherman, that's probably good news. Once the front clears, you have some better weather. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tropics. I really wanted to focus on Erica. Now Danny has fizzled away into pretty much nothingness as he crossed over into the leeward and over towards the Dominican Republic. Not much left of him. He pretty much got sheared away by southwesterly winds. So we're looking at Erica. Tropical Storm Erica was just named last night, a little bit before 11 o'clock by the National Hurricane Center. And you can see here in the infrared, or the visible imagery loop, as the sun is coming up over the Atlantic, you can see a little bit better creeping into the window to the east here. But for right now, as we're left with some cloud tops building, she's taking her time getting her act together, and I expect that will probably be the trend for the next few days. Not a whole lot of organization, not the most impressive outflow. We do see a little bit of an upper level shear from the south to the north, and you can see some of these cloud tops being blown off on this side up here. So that's not allowing her to rapidly intensify, which is fine. She's going to take her time getting her act together, like I said, and there isn't really a lot of these high thunderstorm tops built around the actual center, so not the best organized yet. And if you look at the color imagery, you can see that as well. These blobs of moisture, one to the west, one to the north, and then one to the south, sort of not very well defined around the center. But as time goes on, she may get a better surface low pressure developed where these thunderstorms wrap around and start to get things going along. Now the model track guidance brings this storm north of these islands towards the southeast coast. From this point, when it gets to the Bahamas or closer to the Bahamas, just north of the Caribbean, it's probably going to have a more favorable environment to develop even more, especially as it gets closer to the Gulf Stream, and it's following that ridge, that Bermuda Azores high ridge, as what we talked about earlier, being further removed to the east. That's the general flow where the storms would go right along that. Now the frontal boundary that's going to get hung off of our coast, if that hangs around off of our coast long enough, it could bring this storm out to sea as a fish storm. But if the trough erodes and we actually get high pressure building all the way fully into the coastline, it may be something that we need to take a look at. So the advanced scatterometer, I know that this is sort of advanced for some of you, but I wanted to take a look at that, and you can see some of this rotation here wrapping around the storm. This is how we can see things without actually having to do a hurricane hunter fly-in. And some of these winds are right around 40 to 45 knots at best. So that's pretty much what they have Erica at, is 45 mile per hour winds, and heading west at 20 miles an hour. So if we look at even this advanced scatterometer reading, we can see, let me go up in that, there we go, it's about the same, it's about 40 knots. Intensity guidance, now with intensity guidance, the models always try to use data to determine if the storm is going to intensify or if it's going to weaken. Now a lot of these models are starting to trend on the upwards, so as time goes on, and this is all the way out, as you can see, the general trend is very slow on the intensity models. So not even seeing Category 1 hurricanes until we get the first one, I think, reaches that at about 60 hours. So you're talking 2 days from now. So it looks like Erica could stay as a tropical storm for at least 48 hours before any intensification begins. And then you see the other models start to kind of jump on board with it. And there are quite a few of them that take her to a Category 1 at the very least. And then we're starting to see a Category 2. If we look at the GFS model for timeout, we're looking at, I'll go ahead and push play here, and I want you to watch this area right here. Now as she goes over the islands, we see a little bit of a weakening phase and still holding together, and as she gets over the Gulf Stream, we'll probably see some development here just north of the Bahamas, and there's where the low pops back up again. So the GFS has her weakening as she goes over the islands, but holding together as a depression or even maybe a weak tropical storm, and then redeveloping out over this way, and then being a fish storm and heading back out to sea. So we'll have to see what happens there. But if we look at the Euro model, this is a very interesting run, and we do have to watch the Euro model because this one brings the storm in even closer and develops her even stronger over the north of the Bahamas and into the Gulf Stream. And if we go even further into 192 hours and into 216 and 240, the Euro is really developing Erica into quite a hurricane. So we're looking at maybe a Category 2 and maybe even a Category 3 hurricane, depending on what the Euro model develops her as in pressure. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye if the Euro model is bringing her this close into our coastline. That usually raises eyebrows for meteorologists to take a better look at what her path is going to be. But for right now, she's so far away. These models could change. The next model will be available at 12 o'clock today. This one came out for midnight last night. So that'll do it for the Chucktown wind report. Nothing to worry about with Erica right now. We're just going to keep an eye on it and see what happens there. But for today, we're talking 12 to 16 knots. With some potential for higher numbers ahead of this front as long as things stay dry along the coast. As we get into tomorrow, we're talking 10 to 14 knots, and then we get into Thursday, we're talking 9 to 13 knots, and then Friday, southeast, probably weaker, 8 to 12 knots. So general southerly flow for this week. Thunderstorms abundant, and definitely an increased chance of rains and storms more widespread along the coastline. Bring your umbrellas, keep an eye on radar, and that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Have a good day.